We will start with Professor Till Roenneberg. He's a very well-known professor in chronobiology from the medical school of the LMU in Munich. I personally know him, actually, I think since the start of my scientific career, but at that time from his work on fluorescent algae, showing a circadian pattern in movement, which I thought was fascinating at that time. But since his publication of the Munich chronotype questionnaire and also from his wonderful epidemiological work in human chronotypes, he's very well known on human work as well. He is currently president of the World Federation of Societies for Chronobiology and former president of the European Society for Rhythm Research. He has initiated and directed several large national and international research networks and received several international research prizes. He has published more than 200 papers, and after his relatively recent retirement, he founded also a company, Chronsulting, because he loves what he's doing, and this allowed him to continue as a scientist to continue data analysis and advising people about their sleep and the biological clock. So I'm happy to give the floor to Till to present his talk, Why Shifting Daylight Saving Time is a Bad Idea. Please go ahead, Till.
Marijke, thank you very much for this lovely introduction. We are getting more used to doing these things from our own offices and or bedrooms or wherever you are. But I think that we should be hopeful and optimistic to do these things in person again soon. So can you all see my screen? Can I start my my presentation?
Yes, it's perfectly visible for me.
Good. So I have about 10 minutes to talk about something which one can finish within 10 seconds by just saying it's a bad idea or I love long evenings or whatever. But if you want to understand what's at stake when we talk about sleep, circadian rhythms, and light, you have to understand a bit more about the context, because sleep and all our behaviors during the day are always only understandable in actually the context of the flow of life from one day, one night to the next. And I'm starting out as a good problem-based teacher. I'm starting out immediately with a problem that you should be aware of. There have been several publications over the last 5 or 6 years that probed different aspects of life, health, income, energy usage, traffic accidents, and so forth, across time zones. And the best country to do that is basically China, Russia, and the United States, because there you have a relatively homogeneous culture. It's very relative, of course, from east to west, and their countries are large in their east-west extension. You can, and America is especially good because you can have access to a lot of data, and they have 4 time zones, and they have very good senses of how many people live in different parts of the country. So what we're looking at here is at the border between 2 time zones, and that's the 0 line. And to the right of the 0 line, you see what's happening. And this is actually a health index. The health index is composed out of obesity, diabetes, acute myocardial infarction, coronary and angina diseases, stroke, breast, collateral or prostate cancer. And the lower the number, the worse your health, and the higher the number, the better your health. And what you see here is if you move from the time zone barrier towards the east, that is to the right, the health index gets better. Now, the culture doesn't change at the transition from one time zone to the other. It actually, it could be one village from the other, or it could be even going through a small town. which are excluded in this analysis. But what you see is that at the time zone border, the health index immediately jumps up again and is still, although not quite as drastic as in the time zone to the east of this border, the Western time zone still shows a decline in health index. But what's important is that with the time change of the time zone border, health index is propelled upwards. Now, this is all due to something that has been around with living organisms since 250 million years, and that is a biological clock that organizes what our bodies do throughout the 24-hour cycle. And this is a scheme that shows you the master clock in the brain of a human, which is above the crossing of the optic nerves. And the information that this clock gathers, actively gathers, to synchronize itself to the 24-hour cycle is light. And of course, there are many, many, many clocks, cellular clocks, in every cell of our body and in every organ, and they are actually using the suprachiasmatic nucleus, that is this master clock, to get information about the sun outside. So the SCN is something akin to an internal sun for the other clocks. The fact that these clocks still, under very industrialized conditions, listen, in quotes, only to light and darkness, is shown by this graph, which shows a distribution over different pixels of latitude and longitudes across Europe. And that is from our MCTQ database, which comprises about 300,000 entries. And you can see Europe going from Budapest in the eastern border to Galicia, the northwest of Spain, to the western border of the time zone. And what you can see is that the circadian timing of sleep, the mid-sleep on free days, is early, i.e. bright green in the east of this time zone, and it becomes later and later towards the west of the time zone, where it is red, depicted in red pixels, and the black pixels are sort of in between. So what is increasing from the eastern to the western border of a time zone is what we call social jet lag, and the question is, what is social jet lag? Now, we discovered many years ago that there was something that looks like a jet lag, namely that people seem to be flying from the Netherlands to New England on Friday afternoon or evening and come back Monday morning. And that is, people live different lives on the weekend than they do in the work week. I'm not going to go into this, but this is real biology being confronted with the sociology, and you can see the sociology by on work days. These are the red bars of sleep. They end at the same time, all of them, and what that means is you wake yourself up with an alarm clock. And what you see on free days is more what a combination of what the biological clock wants us to do, and of what we have to catch up on sleep, which we lost on work days. Now, this can be measured, and the difference between what we do on free days, on work-free days, and what we do on weekdays can be measured, and we called it social jet lag. The interesting finding is that in Central Europe, at least, or even in the world, doesn't matter, only 13% of the people do not suffer from any social jet lag, whereas 87% suffer from more or less a difference between what their body clock wants and what society wants of them. Ever since we've introduced the concept, the literature has gone into looking at associations between social jet lag and other behaviors or health aspects. And the larger the difference between your biological clock and your social time zone, the more likely you are a smoker, the more alcohol you drink, the more caffeine you drink. The alcohol allows your system to come to rest a bit earlier than your body clock wants it to in the evening. And then, of course, the caffeine might overcome the sleepiness that you have because you haven't slept enough. But it's also supporting weight gain. You are more likely to develop diabetes 2 or other metabolic problems. The prevalence to acquire certain forms of cancer, as has been shown in the shift work research, is higher. The higher your social jet lag, the more likely you become depressed, and the more likely you cannot give your best academic performance. I'm not going to go into these things. These are all published things. Very interesting is one of the observations that Céline Vetter did, and that is, if you look at shift workers, the extreme late types have a lower chance to develop type 2 diabetes when working in the night shifts compared to having to work in the normal 9-to-5 jobs. This last statement is to make you aware of the individuality and the diversity of the circadian clock in the population. Now, we've seen this, and what this means is that from east to west within a time zone, the social jet lag increases. Now, I'm not saying that the social jet lag is the cause of the increased cancer risks or decreased health index, but there is a strong association, and I'm sure that the social jet lag situation is behind this. Now, when we go from east to west, all in the States, which is a good petri dish for these experiments, you can see when people turn their lights out or when the sun sets. And if you bin this in certain categories of counties, then you can see wonderfully these borders where the local time switches, and therefore you get the same wave again across from east to west. Now, this is the normal situation of time zones in Europe as we are now, and now I'm slowly getting to the actual question of DST, where we are now in the so-called winter time, which is not winter time, which is standard time. And you can see in the background the originally invented time zones, namely Greenwich Mean Time as yellow, or the Atlantic one in red, and the Central European one in green, and the next one in blue, and the next one in purple, and so forth. So these were the originally meant time zones introduced by a conference in Washington in the late 19th century. And what you see is that they were quite clever because they wanted nobody to be further away than half an hour from sun time. Up till, they still had a notion about the importance of sun time, whereas we have lost the notion of this importance. And you can see that for pure political reasons, Spain, for example, and France are in the same time zone as Germany, Poland, Czech Republic, Austria, and all the rest in that very western part of the time zone. Whereas they should be, as you can see from the background, should be in the time zone of England, of Greenwich Mean Time. And Portugal is borderlining the next time zone, and it may be wise to not actually be in this Greenwich Mean Time zone, but together with Iceland in another time zone. Now, this is under standard time conditions. A couple of days ago, we were under this condition where the entire green zone now lived in the time zone that is around Moscow, or that borders Moscow on the Eastern Front. So we all had to basically live the same as Moscow Standard Time. England had to live standard Prague time or Berlin time, and so forth. So you see that the match between what was originally thought to be close to sun time is completely thrown out of the window, and we are not living according to the sun time anymore. The last panel on the right just shows you, which I've already alluded to, this is actually how, if we wanted to live close to the sun time, Remember, our biological clocks and our biological daily rhythms listen only to the sun and to the light and darkness and not to the social watches. So we should, for health reasons, give the biological clock a chance to live in its time zone and not somewhere else, because this is not like traveling. We are not traveling and therefore getting a new light dark cycle. We are staying where we are and have to live in a different light dark cycle. So that's different. So it's very nice in Europe because the big borders between Germany and the Benelux countries and France are very much along the border of the time zone. So it would be no problem to split the two. Let me show you measurements that we've done of people, and we've done an enormous amount in this actimetry database. And of course, since time changes happen twice a year, we can follow them. So what you see here is, and I'm not going to go into the details, are sleep episodes, and you can even see the sleep structure in its 90 to 120 minute rhythm. And these are the sleep structures on work days across time from the 26th of February to the end of April. And you can see a little jump, and the yellow background is the photo period that increases in this time. So you could argue that the time change in March is wonderful because it follows the photo period, but that is actually not the case. So it looks as if sleep was following the photo period, but that's enforced because if you look at the free day sleep, you can see that not much is happening. And the free day sleep is the one that reports much more faithfully what the biological clock wants, in quotes, or what the biological clock would be better in living. And if you look at the details, there is no difference in the free day sleep. And if you look at the profiles of the workday activity, you can see that there is a slight movement to the left, to earlier times by 1 hour. And that is enforced because if you look at the same things going on free days before and after the change to DST, there is not much of a difference. And I would like to emphasize, it's not so much the things that can happen after the clocks were changed, where we know there are incidents of traffics or wildlife being run over, or cardiovascular diseases popping up. This is not exactly what is so important to consider, but it's the chronic situation living in a different time zone throughout the 7 months of the year that should be considered as a chronic effect. And what you see here is the time course from the database of social jet lag. And you see these two huge incisions, which are nothing else but the spring DST change, which gives people an additional amount of social jet lag. And since we become earlier in the summer than we do in the winter, social jet lag should have this sinusoidal profile where we have the minimum in the summer and the maximum of social jet lag in the winter. And you could imagine, you could model that we're adding all this social jet lag onto the already existing strain that by introducing daylight savings time. I once said, looking at everything that goes wrong with social jet lag, that the DST makes us dumb, dumpy, and depressed because we can't be as good with our intellectual properties. We get more chubby because we gain weight with social jet lag, and we are more likely to become depressed. So my summary of what DST does with us and why I think it is not a good idea is because the population becomes dumber, dumpier, and more depressed. And with that, I thank all the people that are always involved in the work that I'm doing throughout the world, and without whom nothing of this would be possible. And I thank you very much for listening.